Joe Brady has hired an offensive coordinator, a special teams coordinator, and the Bills got a huge update as it relates to the 2026 salary cap. We're going to break it all down today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Well, folks, welcome in. There's been quite a bit of Bills news. They've hired a special teams coordinator, an offensive coordinator. Nice update on Tyler Bass. We have an idea regarding the 2026 salary cap, and so we needed to record an episode. I wasn't going to make you wait until Monday for reaction on all of this news, so we're doing it right now, dropping this episode on a Saturday. So let's dive into it. The Bills have an offensive coordinator under Joe Brady. Of course, Joe Brady still going to call the plays, but we'll have an offensive coordinator, and it's Pete Carmichael. He's 54 years old, a native of Massachusetts, went to college at Boston College. His father was a football coach for 40 years. 18 of those in college, 9 in the NFL. And Pete Carmichael started out really as a quarterback's coach at Louisiana Tech from 1995 through 99. Then he goes to the NFL in 2000. He's the Browns tight ends coach. In 2001, he's the Washington offensive assistant and quality control coach. In 2022 through 23, he's the Chargers quality control coach on offense. And then he becomes the assistant wide receiver coach for the Chargers, 2004 to 2005. And then his big breakthrough came in 2006 with the Saints when he united with Sean Payton and had a long career under Sean Payton. In 2006, he was the Saints quarterbacks coach. 2007 through 2008, he was a quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator. And then he was their offensive coordinator from 2009 through 2023. And then he went to Denver with Sean Payton 2024 through 2025, and he served as a senior offensive assistant for the Broncos. And so the story here with Pete Carmichael is the relationship with Sean Payton. It's time with Joe Brady from their time together with the Saints. And then, of course, what they were able to get done with Drew Brees. And they had some unbelievably good offenses with Drew Brees, 11 straight years of being in the top 9 of yards per game, 8 of those in the top 4, 12 straight years of a top 10 scoring offense, 8 of those in the top 5. And, of course, Drew Brees retired as the NFL's all-time leading passer with over 80,000 yards, number 2 in passing touchdowns. Now, Tom Brady became the all-time leading passer later on as he continued to play. But when Drew Brees retired, he was the all-time leading passer in the history of the NFL. Now, one interesting note about Pete Carmichael, for as long of a tenure as he has with Sean Payton, which there's no denying that, he did have 2 years with the Saints when Sean Payton retired, where he stayed with the Saints and he was their offensive coordinator and the play caller. And his first season wasn't that great. It was with Andy Dalton at quarterback. They were 22nd in scoring and 20th in EPA. Then his second season, they get Derek Carr, and they're 9th in scoring and 12th in EPA, which is pretty respectable coming out of that Sean Payton era with a lot of roster transition, picking up the pieces with Derek Carr and having a pretty decent offense. So it's pretty loud and clear. Joe Brady told you he's from the Sean Payton tree, and he gets a chance to hire this offensive coordinator. And of course, it's the guy who has the most time ever with Sean Payton. And so it begs the question, what is a Sean Payton offense? And so I want to share some of the characteristics of what I believe a Sean Payton offense is based on, decades of watching Sean Payton offenses. And of course, I think a lot of this will will carry over to what the Bills have, but it also gives you an idea of maybe some of the directions that it's going here under Joe Brady and Pete Carmichael. So again, characteristics of a Sean Payton offense to me, I think about the receivers, and they always had an X receiver, a big-bodied receiver that can win leverage battles and, run those quick slants, those glance routes, those comebacks, and become a rhythm player for the offense, a possession-type receiver. You think about Michael Thomas, Marcus Colston, Traquan Smith, those types of guys that are physical, big-bodied, that can establish leverage and present an available target. It's what they want Keon Coleman to be. I don't know if he'll get there, but that's always been a staple of a Sean Payton offense. Now, they've always paired that guy with a true field stretcher. I mean, they had Devery Henderson for a long time with the Saints, Brandon Cooks in his prime with the Saints, Ted Ginn, Chris Olave, a guy they drafted in the first round who gives you that vertical field stretching ability. And so they like that field stretcher to go with the big-bodied guy. And think about even the Broncos right now. They have Cortland Sutton and Troy Franklin. That's their 1 and 2, and then that kind of power slot player that they have in Pat Bryant. Before that, it was Devon Vele. It's a very standard group that you come to expect Sean Payton to have at receiver. And so that's what the Bills need. They need that field stretcher. We'll see if they believe Keon Coleman's their X. I don't know. Maybe they should go in a different direction, but conceptually, I'd expect them to have a true X paired with a true field stretcher. They also are always into having these flex tight ends. Jimmy Graham, Jared Cook, Evan Ingram now with the Broncos. That's a staple of what these offenses like to have. They had the Taysom Hill role. These really versatile tight ends that thrive being flexed out and, winning in the seams and providing that mismatch type player. Of course, that's who you want Dalton Kincaid to be. Another characteristic of a Sean Payton offense is pass-catching running backs. Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles, Alvin Kamara. I mean, this is a huge part of what they do. Think about the backs that they've assembled in Denver, like Jaleel McLaughlin or an R.J. Harvey. This is part of what they want to get done. Tyler Beatty, a guy that they like just because of the pass-catching skill. So I hope that the James Cook, Ty Johnson, Ray Davis receiving piece will really ratchet up, because it was a huge part and is a huge part of a Sean Payton offense. Also, Sean Payton, during his time with the Saints and now with the Broncos, they produce offensive line talent. There's no question. Check this out. 2006 through 2021. That was Sean Payton's run with the Saints. 11 different offensive linemen were named to the Pro Bowl, and they accounted for 26 Pro Bowls during that stretch from 2006 to 2021. And we've seen the offensive line talent in Denver start to come together with what they've gotten out of Quinn Miners at right guard and Garrett Bowles at left tackle. And they got other good players as well. But, I think high-end, Pro Bowl impact type blockers, it's always been a part of what Sean Payton has in his offenses. And just kind of thinking through the years of offensive line talent they've had, when you go to the guard position, they got the big, nasty, mauling guards, guys like Carl Nicks, Ben Grubbs, Larry Warford, Jari Evans. Currently now they have Quinn Miners. They drafted Cesar Ruiz in the first round. They like these big, physical, mauling guards, and then they love supremely athletic offensive tackles. Think Teron Armstead, Ryan Ramczyk, Jamal Brown is a freak athlete, John Stinchcomb. Look at what he has with the Broncos, and Garrett Bowles and Mike McGlinchey, big-time athletes. So I would expect length and athleticism outside, power on the inside, right? That's kind of the makeup of a Sean Payton offensive line. And so other characteristics, you get a lot of personnel variety, a lot of formation variety, right? Nothing's going to be static with personnel and formations. It's going to look different with different people on the field. That's pretty characteristic of what the Bills do now. I think a lot of condensed formations. There'll be some spread, but I think a lot of it is tighter formations in terms of width. You'll see a lot of motion. That's, of course, what we see now with the Bills. A good amount of under center play action, which I love that so much. Sean Payton does like to work from gun quite a bit. Now, maybe a little bit more than in the past, but that under center stuff's always been a staple. there's a lot of West Coast principles to the passing game. And what I mean by West Coast is there's a lot of timing stuff. There's a lot of getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands, route combinations that the quarterback's got to work within rhythm and get the football out of his hands into the hands of playmakers. And a lot of it is mitigating negative plays. I think about Sean Payton offenses, and their quarterbacks are always terrific at not taking a lot of sacks. Drew Brees didn't take a lot of sacks. Bo Nix doesn't take a lot of sacks. And in fact, those guys, Bo Nix and Drew Brees, very outstanding at limiting pressure to turn into sacks. Even Josh Allen last year, he was a master at it. And so that's a huge part of what this does. And there's like this blend of efficiency, but there's an aggressive element to it. If you think Sean Payton, aggressive's got to be a word that rings true in your head because of just what he's always done, whether it's special teams, short yardage, taking shots, even watch the way he played against the Patriots in that AFC Championship game, probably aggressive to a fault at times in that game. So there's a lot of efficiency on schedule, but they certainly have some aggressiveness to it as well. So those are some of the characteristics that I think of a Sean Payton offense that is obviously being, implemented in Buffalo, right? That's the vision here. And that's the background on Pete Carmichael. Coming up next, I'll tell you a little bit more about my specific thoughts on this hire. The Bills are interviewing a very interesting quarterback coach candidate, and then they've also hired a special teams coach with a ton of experience. We'll talk about that next, folks. Be sure to stick with me. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right through the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it all. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's a perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. All right, so we have an offensive coordinator. There's a head coach. It's the Sean Payton tree. We've talked all about what a Sean Payton offense looks like. Obviously, Pete Carmichael has been just swimming in Sean Paytonese, right, for the last several decades, really. And so, what do I think about this? Well, this is exactly the type of choice for offensive coordinator that I think makes a lot of sense for the Bills under Joe Brady. Pete Carmichael, Joe Brady, they speak the same language. There's got to be a lot of trust there. He's held this exact type of role where you're an offensive coordinator in a non-play calling role. And, there's so much more to coordinating an offense than just, picking the plays that they're going to run during the game at the moment that you run them. You got to lead the offensive meetings. You got to develop the game plan. You have to do all the install stuff. You got to develop the call sheet. And so this is a very, offenses are very collaborative. It's not just one guy. An entire staff works together to put together a call sheet, to put together a game plan, and then one guy ultimately picks the plays. But, really, Joe Brady as the play caller, all he's doing is taking a call sheet, and the call sheet's going to give all the circumstances. 1st and 10, where it's 1st and 10, at the 50, 1st and 10 in the red zone, 1st and 10 backed up a little bit, 2nd and mid, 2nd and short, 2nd and long at all the different parts of the field, short yardage, red zone. Right? You have every situation, you've prepared for it, and you've said, these are the plays we want to run. And so the play caller has a menu for every situation and picks a play, right? So that's what the play caller does. The entire staff builds that inventory of plays, installs it, goes through meetings with players. There's so much to it. Develops game plans. And so there's a lot that Pete Carmichael is going to do. He's going to do everything except be the guy that in the moment picks the play on the call sheet that he probably made. Of course, with Joe Brady and with the entire offensive staff. And of course, this is really necessary to have a guy that's really into that rhythm, right? So that Joe Brady can be the head coach, right? He's not the offensive coordinator. I have appreciated how many times he said that, since we've really started to hear from him as head coach. He's like, I'm not the offensive coordinator anymore. I got to work with the defense. I got to work with the special teams. And having a guy like Pete Carmichael is going to give him that freedom to go do that while he can trust that Pete Carmichael is going to handle what he needs to handle as the offensive coordinator. It just makes a lot of sense, right? Makes a lot of sense. One question that I do have is that as this report came through, and it's not official, it's a report. Now, I will say that Joe Brady on One Bills Live certainly talked about Pete Carmichael as his offensive coordinator. So this is all but done. You do have to satisfy the Rooney Rule for coordinator hires. You have to interview at least one external minority candidate. And we haven't heard anything about interviews. The only thing we saw is a report. I think it was from Diana Rossini saying that Pete Carmichael was the selection to be the Bills offensive coordinator. And so they better have satisfied that Rooney Rule. I'm not saying they did or didn't. I'm just saying we have not seen a report on any interviews for offensive coordinator, except for that it's going to be Pete Carmichael. So hopefully that layer was taken care of. One thing that's pretty cool to me about this whole thing is the Bills are interviewing Connor Senger to be the quarterback's coach. He's also interviewing with the Packers, so there's some competition here. He has served as the Cardinals passing game coordinator, 30 years old, former college quarterback at Wisconsin and then at Wisconsin Oshkosh. And he's one of those young, fast-track, bright offensive minds that I think, has a really bright future ahead of him in the NFL. And I would love to have a guy like that to go with Pete Carmichael and Joe Brady as your kind of your some of your key offensive minds to give yourself some ceiling there too, right? To have some younger coaches that are on the up, right? That you have part of your staff. I think that's especially for a team like the Bills, where it's not just about developing your players. You got to develop staff, right? It's inevitably part of the deal where as you're a successful team, people are going to want what you have. Joe Brady interviewed for 6 of the 10 openings, right? And so that's just an inevitable part. We've seen Brian Daboll leave to be a head coach. So you got to develop coaches just like you have to develop players. And I think a guy like Connor Senger gives you a chance to have somebody that's in the pipeline that can, grow with you and maybe take on a bigger job with your team, or maybe they get hired away. And I think that's part of good coaches. They know how to develop coaches and players. The Bills also have a special teams coordinator. It's Jeff Rodgers. Let's talk about him. He's 48 years old. He has a ton of experience. He's been a special teams coordinator in the NFL since 2010. And before that, he has 8 years as an assistant special teams coordinator, right? So this guy has a ton of experience and has had an excellent career. His first job as a lead special teams coach was 2010 with the Panthers. Then he was with the Broncos 2011 through 2014. And he was with the Bears 2015 through 2017. And he's been with the Cardinals since 2018. And in 2019 with the Cardinals, he was given the title assistant head coach, which he's held since 2019. And he survived 3 different head coaching changes with the Cardinals, sticking on as not only their special teams coordinator, but the assistant head coach. He's coached some really good special teams players. Think prime Matt Prater. Andy Lee was one of the best punters in the league for a while. Tariq Cohen was electric as a returner with the Bears. Trindon Holiday was electric as a punt returner. He had 2 Pro Bowlers in 2024. DJ Dallas, a kick returner. Chad Ryland, was a Pro Bowl kicker, which is interesting because Chad Ryland was a 4th-round pick of the Patriots the year before, and the second season he goes to Arizona and he's a Pro Bowl kicker. And so there's been a lot of really big-time special teams figures that have operated under Jeff Rodgers. A lot of experience. If you go to Pro Football Focus, they grade special teams every year, and they go back the last 13 years. So not quite all of Jeff Rodgers' tenure in the league, but he has his units, according to Pro Football Focus, have ranked 16th or better in 10 of the last 13 seasons. So like top half of the league in 10 of the last 13 seasons, which is as far as they go back. I wish I can go a little bit further back. I think there's like maybe 3 or 4 years on the front end of his time that I wasn't able to look up. Now, 2025 wasn't a great year for Jeff Rodgers. Now, Pro Football Focus ranked them 16th in special teams, but they had 3 punters. They had Blake Gilligan, who's a good punter, and then he got hurt, and so they had to go to Matt Hawk. You know about that guy, Pat O'Donnell. And then Chad Ryland really declined as a kicker. He was only 76% kicker this past year, and they were 30th in kick return yardage against them on average. So it wasn't a great year this past year. I'm not trying to hide from that. But I think the overall story of his career is a good one. He's respected. He's experienced. And you like to think that Joe Brady can really hand off special teams to Jeff Rodgers and trust that it will be coached and executed at a professional level, as Joe Brady is a first-time head coach with a lot to figure out. So get a guy with a ton of experience to run your special teams. Get a guy with a ton of experience that speaks your language to be your offensive coordinator. And obviously there's more to do. We talked about the offensive line coach hire of Pat Meyer on the last episode. The defensive coordinator piece is still a huge one that has to come through. And then, of course, a ton of assistant coaches, right, like positional coaches as well. So Joe Brady's getting to work, but still quite a bit of work to do. All right, coming up next, the salary cap. We know what it's going to be, or we at least have a range for what it's going to be this year, which allows us to gain an understanding of, kind of where the Bills will be. And then a big update on Tyler Bass. We'll talk about that here next, folks. Be sure to stick with us. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for anything, I'd go straight to Indeed to be very specific about what I want, which is real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. In fact, according to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job placement the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, folks, welcome back. Some big news. The NFL informed the teams that the 2026 salary cap will be between $301.2 million and $305.7 million per team. You can expense that much in player salary against the 2026 salary cap, which is a big jump once again from 2025 when it was $279.2 million. So from $279.2 million to at least $301.2 million and as high as $305.7 million. So where do the Bills fall into this? Well, currently the Bills have $311.4 million in top 51 cap allocations. So in the offseason, your cap position is determined by the 51 highest salaries that you have. And right now for the Bills, that's at $311.4 million. So depending on where it ultimately falls in that range that the league reported, the Bills will have to clear between $5.7 and $10.2 million in cap space to become cap compliant before the start of the new league year on March 11th. So a lot of people say, well, how can you be over the cap? Well, that's because the new league year starts on March 11th, and you have until then, right? You know what your cap commitments are. You know what the cap is. Now you have to get yourself in a position where before March 11th, you are compliant. And look, they got to clear $5 to $10 million in cap space. The Bills have been in much worse positions over the last several years. Much worse. I'm not really concerned about getting cap compliant and creating some cap space to make some moves as well. And now that we know what this range is going to be, it allows us to have some good conversations about what opportunities the Bills should pursue to release players, to restructure players, to get the cap space that they're going to need to build this 2026 football team. And so that'll be a big part of our content moving forward. In fact, next week in the Herd Mentality Substack, I'm going to be writing an article that will show every player on the team and what the consequences are of releasing them so that everyone can see that full menu of what players the Bills can move on from and generate cap space. You know, that's not always the case where you can release a player and generate cap space based on how the contract is structured. So we will bring all that to light starting next week and start to have those conversations about what the right moves are for the Bills to make to become cap compliant and build this cap space. Matt Marino of Syracuse.com, I think he was part of the breakout session that Brandon Beane had, and said this, reported this about Tyler Bass. Brandon Beane said he's not 100%, but he's getting close. There was an outside chance he could have kicked in the Super Bowl if Matt Prater wasn't available and the Bills advanced. And he said this, on next season, I would expect Tyler Bass to be our kicker in 2026. So good, right? Like, let's hope he's healthy and ready to resume his career and be a great kicker for the Buffalo Bills. Now, we'll see what the cap implications are. I got to study that. They also signed a kicker to a futures deal, so there'll be some competition. But hopefully Tyler Bass can get healthy and put all this behind him and get back on track and have a great rest of his career with the Bills. But it's good to kind of get our expectations in the place where we can know that Brandon Beane says it's his expectation that Tyler Bass will be the kicker. Here's a piece of news that maybe some people will not like. Brandon Beane also said that the performance staff, in terms of the strength and conditioning coach, the head trainer, they're all going to remain in their roles. So Nate Bresky, Joe Collins, Will Greenberg, they're all staying on. In fact, Brandon Beane said this, we definitely had more soft tissue things than I would say were self-inflicted. And I think the alignment and the collaboration that Joe and I will have, let's just say, with Nate Bresky, Joe Collins, and Will Greenberg, I think the five of us will get very much in sync, and I expect things to improve. So they're continuing with the strength coach, with the head trainer, and obviously this was a horrible year for injuries for the Bills. And look, I struggle with how to assess blame. I know that we are obsessed with pointing fingers and blaming something for everything. Look, everybody was really happy when the Bills moved on from Eric Ciano, who was their longtime strength and conditioning coach. And this past year, he went to Jacksonville. Jacksonville was unbelievably healthy this year. They had like one guy. It was Travis Hunter. Had a knee injury. Like, that's basically it. I think they had like 4 guys on injured reserve the whole year. And maybe like one of them mattered. So, I don't know. Football is a game played by big, strong, athletic dudes. It's a violent game. Like, people are going to get hurt. The injury risk is 100%. You want to minimize it as much as possible, but I do struggle with this wanting to blame the strength staff for injuries. It's like, I'm sure some of it is preventable. And I think this past year was a year where there's some black eyes with all the practice injuries. And, you know, even Brandon Beane said that there were soft tissue things that he said, I would say were self-inflicted. So there are some things that obviously need to improve. But what's also curious to me about the Bills and their injuries is how so many of them have been concentrated on the defensive side of the football. It's always the defensive players, always. And so what's up with that? You know, what's up with that? I'm hopeful that the new direction on defense will hopefully allow for a healthier defense, because for as much as those defenses have let the team down in those playoff elimination games, a lot of the times they didn't have the guys they're supposed to have, right? A lot of injuries. And so hopefully this team can get healthy, stay healthy, and be healthy when it matters most. That'd be nice. That'd be a nice change. All right, so there you have it. Wanted to get a little Saturday episode in for you. There's a lot to talk about. And I didn't want to add more to the menu of things to talk about before we talked about these things. So I'm glad we were able to get this episode in on a Saturday. We'll obviously cover whatever comes next. Hopefully defensive coordinator hire very soon. Hopefully that's Jim Schwartz or Jim Leonard or Anthony Weaver or Raheem Morris, right? All of that would be exciting. Look forward to breaking that down if and when that comes through. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about starting next week, where I want to get into some positional discussions. I want to have a Josh Allen discussion. I want to talk about his 2025 season, where I want to see some growth, that position group in general, Mitch Trubisky, an expiring contract. What's the plan at backup quarterback? So it's time to have those types of conversations as well, which we will do next week as we continue to cover this coaching transition, but also do the normal stuff that we would do here on Locked On Bills. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you are subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.